whenever I watch a film and I see someone in a white t-shirt, I'm like, they're going to get shot. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Now seating for Empty Theater Club.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Empty Theater Club, a podcast for people who enjoy scrolling IMDb trivia, figuring out the cast and crew. I'm Val.
And I'm Cam, and today we are joined by Miss Becky Gore, who is a highly acclaimed costume designer. She's worked on many projects such as Barbarians Rising, which was Emmy nominated, the BAFTA winning drama Run, another BAFTA nominated drama Shell, the BAFTA winning anything that has BAFTA in front of it. Miss Gore's been working on the projects. I feel like adult life skills. You also contributed to one of Val and I's favorite shows, The Great, which is very cool. And she recently worked on Alice Lowe's Timestalker, which I saw back in October in the UK, but it just released in the US on Valentine's Day and is now available for you to rent or buy or in select theaters. I think it's like randomly showing in Ohio. So that's fun for the people in Ohio. But welcome, Becky, to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's so nice to hear from you guys.
So, like, for people who, I think let's start with this. I think Val and I know we love costumes and films. We know the role of a costume designer, but some people might not be familiar with the work that you do. So, for those not familiar, what would you say, like, is your role on a set? What are the kind of the contributions you make to helping tell the story?
Well, the first thing you kind of do is sort of meet with the director and talk through the character, who they are, what you want to say about the character as well, because like sometimes there can be things about the character that you want to withhold, like information that you want to withhold. So you have a really good talk about the look and feel of things, and who you want to create, and then you kind of just sort of then go away and research everything, start sort of working with the actors as well, because their input is crucial. It's one of those things where you're never quite sure what's going to happen in a fitting, and sometimes the character can kind of evolve and take a bit of a detour. But yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. You start, you research, you gather all the things, you try them on, and it all sort of like, you see what sticks.
You like play dress up for a little bit, see what,
yeah. It's that sort of alchemy of the process of putting all those parts together, of like the director's vision, what the actor wants, and then what we kind of what sort of works in the moment, really.
Yeah. So when we'll talk about Timestalker and more about the pathway and everything, but just talking about films in general, do you have, what kind of, is there a movie or a TV show that you said, oh, what is this? Like, this is really, this costume is standing out to me, and then that kind of launched you into wanting to go into this?
I don't know, really. It's sort of one of those things,
like,
I think, sort of early.
You're like, I just always love this.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think kind of early influences. I think maybe like Blackadder, maybe when I look back, was probably quite a sort of pivotal sort of focus point in a way, because I sort of grew up watching that, and obviously it was something that was like brilliant comedy show, and then all these different time periods, which actually randomly is like so much like Timestalker.
Yeah. An influence there.
And when I decided to do costume and went to London College Fashion to do my degree in costume, the first person that taught us period tailoring was the guy that had cut all the costumes for Blackadder. So it was like a little bit of a
that's so
sort of moment.
So kismet.
Full circle.
But yeah, it's I think I just always loved fashion and loved history as well, and like painting and photography, like creating an image basically, which I think that's a big part of the filmmaking is actually sort of building a world that feels believable, and and costume's quite an integral part of that in sort of creating characters, and I really loved that sort of visual storytelling side to it. So that was something that just became more apparent as I sort of, went to art school and kind of figured it all out, really.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. Val and I were talking like right before you joined that we're trying to think of some of our favorite costume design. And I mentioned like something that really stands out to me anymore is like Val, you said it's a time capsule, even if a movie's not a period piece or anything, it's still a time capsule of like
The
fashion
time.
in
Like
our era.
Yeah.
I just saw like Baby Girl with Nicole Kidman. I love the like jackets and blouses and things that she's wearing in it, which is just like a woman in like 2024. But it's
Exactly,
really
yeah.
funny to watch something like that, or like I just watched September 5th last night. It's very like 70s clothes, and be like, even though it's very subtle, it's still there's so much thought put into it.
It's still yeah. So we'd love to like kind of get your thoughts on how you kind of approach that, especially because I just like what Kim was saying, like every movie could be a period piece.
Right.
So how do you kind of approach the different eras on sets and everything? Like what is your kind of your main research process, like the bare bones?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, I guess, like, in the way I look at it, even contemporary stuff will eventually become a period piece.
Exactly.
So I'm always very aware of what you're putting on camera, and if that's going to like feel really dated in 20 years time, or if
Will
it's
translate.
going to feel very time. So you want to kind of strike that balance between the two things in a way. So yeah, I mean, I guess with different periods, it's always great to research, and my sort of weapon of choice is always sort of photography, because that's the thing. Obviously now in the 20th century, we've had that as a resource. So and just a lot of the time as well, just like everyday things, like even like news footage, stuff like that, because it's real life, rather than something that's contrived. But I'm always like, if I'm working on a specific period, I'll try and watch as many films on that period as possible.
Oh, cool.
So
that's good way to watch more movies too.
Yeah. All the documentaries.
My research in my downtime.
Watch movies.
So, I'll be working during the day on the film, and then in the evening I'll be like, oh, I'll just watch that thing that's like
it's for work. It's for really watch.
Yeah, and then I'm always pausing and taking screenshots.
Oh, that's funny because we were like, God, how do you turn your brain off? But
yeah. Do you ever like? How do you even when you're not researching a gig? Like how do you? Like I feel like when you go to the movies, you're like, oh, like you just watch it differently. Like I just think that since you can't turn it off.
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely do watch things differently.
Yeah.
And I think as a costume designer, you look at things in a different way, and you interpret that language of costume, which is so subtle. So yeah, it's always that thing. I always, whenever I watch a film and I see someone in a white t-shirt, I'm like, they're going to get shot. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. It's true.
Wow.
I know that's such a trope in like telenovelas when someone's like wearing all white and it's not a wedding. It's like, oh, something is about to happen.
That's not as fun.
No, it is. Except somehow we miss it every single time, and then we're like, oh, the hindsight. You mentioned talking to, collaborating with the actors themselves. How does that process usually look like? Do they come to you with mood boards and then hair and makeup? How does that all kind of tie in together, and how do you guys work together?
Well, I mean, usually the way it sort of works, you'll have like a big kind of meeting with the director, and then go away and sort of make mood boards. And then that's sort of like a jumping off point of like just throwing ideas up in the air.
Right.
Sort of, then you kind of focus more on the direction you want to go in. But then obviously it's sort of like when you get the actors on board, because quite often when you start work on film, you might not have all your cast locked down.
Right.
Sometimes that can happen quite late in the day. So
good point.
So you kind of have your ideas of what will work, but then when you get that sort of actor cast, then you're like, oh, actually we could go in a different direction. And it's sort of
like their personality.
Yeah, it kind
when
of
they build a character too, and the outfits are such a part of building how they play someone. Right? Like I've seen so many interviews, like, probably like Helen Mirren, who's like, once I put it on, or when I'm in the makeup chair and I do this, like that's when it
turns on.
Yes,
you're a titular
feels real.
Yeah.
And it's funny because there can often be some really surprising things that come out of a fitting, and for both me and the actor, there's always like, oh, don't know about this, but let's try it, and you're like, oh my god, that's the one thing that then sort of pivots you in a different direction. It's really interesting the way that sort of magic happens in the fitting when you're actually putting all those ideas and all those things onto an actual person. It starts to come to life.
Well, and like their look, like their body type, and like how color, like there's things that make, just as we get ready in the day, like what I prefer to wear, what I know I look like.
But then having the extra layer of, it's not just it's you, it's how you think your character would.
You kind of have to like let go of, I mean, like as an actor, like yourself a little bit, like, and that's kind of scary to me.
Absolutely.
Same with I feel like costume design too. Do you find yourself, we all have our biases of like, we think this would look best
that you really like, versus
but then
that would be hard.
Exactly. Like, how do you kind of manage that of knowing, I know this would look really good on screen, I need this actor to trust me, and yet they're not vibing with it, or the director says no to that, something similar. How do you kind of manage that?
Mourn it and move on.
Well, I think the sort of role of a costume designer, you're very sort of you have to remain very fluid in the process, because you have what the director wants. You have what will work, say if it's for a period, like you have to have that authenticity to make sure that something is correct and it all works, but and then you have to sort of walk that line of like making sure that it's something that the actor is happy with, because ultimately they have to be happy in that skin that you're putting on them. They're creating that character. They have to be that character. They have to feel comfortable in in that skin that you put on them, essentially. And so it's like a little kind of balance, really, of the three things. But usually, you can start out with one idea and it can just become very different by the time you get to the fitting stage. So
like kind of zooming in, I guess, on Timestalker in the context of that, like you said, you do so much research, which is also like incredible. Like you're like at the library doing your like, I'm just
it's very much a historian work.
It is like, it's like an archive, like anthropologist is a type of approach to it. But then which is very cool.
It's a kind of a mix of history and psychology and fashion and a lot of things, really.
That's so fun. But then after you like look at, you're after you find your sources and reference it, then are you going out? I mean, like, are you, at your sewing machine making stuff? Are you going out like
how do you source things?
That's
I mean, with Timestalker, obviously it was 7 different time periods. We started 16th century, then 18th century, then Victorian, then 1940s, then 1980s, and then sort of a dystopian future. So there was like a lot of research and sourcing with costume houses, because we were sort of quite a kind of modest budget, So we sort of hired most of it. So there was a lot of time spent, in the costume houses pulling stuff for the characters. And then there was also like a lot that needed to be made, because I mean it's quite sort of, there's a lot of very pivotal moments which are very sort of definite, and like with Agnes's wedding dress in the 80s, we knew we needed 2 of those, so I sourced like a wedding dress pattern from the 80s, with this big sort of poofy kind of meringue super 80s dress, and we got like 2 of those made because we knew that she sort of was going to be doing a lot of stunts in them, and there was going to be a sort of stab wound and all these kind of things. So and again with Nick Frost, he was quite a late casting, so we had we had him on board 2 weeks before shooting, and we knew that everything that we needed for him, like his ball costume, which is like this really flamboyant gold thing, you know, and there was like his 80s wedding suit, which was like pastel blue kind of 70s thing with this big ruffled shirt, you know. We knew we wanted all those things, and we knew we wouldn't find them in costume houses, so they ended up sort of being a make. So when we finally got him confirmed, I sort of put out a little costume SOS on some of the WhatsApp groups, and
that's so fun. I love the infrastructure.
Any tailors that have worked with Nick in the last like year or so, and somebody, a lovely tailor, came forward from who'd worked with him on the Nevers, and she gave us a pattern, and we adapted that for his 80s suit, and then I found another a jacket to fit him, and got a wonderful tailor who was like 18th century whiz, who was a recommendation from Sharon Long, who is the designer on The Great. So I was like, we need
like, okay, you're
like,
vetted,
you know, wizards to whip this into shape in 2 weeks. So that was brilliant, because loads of people, because Nick is so loved and adored in the industry, you know, lots of people sort of came to the rescue and came to help him. So we got all of his makes underway and got them all done in the 2 weeks. But that was probably like the biggest sort of like
because this actually could be bad.
That's like so nice too about like film. I don't think people, especially who aren't tapped into it, like the love and the community on a set and in the industry, that you like, that's so beautiful that you can
cultivate that. When you were doing research for that, I mean, what was your maybe favorite unexpected reference that you pulled? That you were said, oh, I didn't even think about this. Like when you were looking through, you know, the history books, watching the documentaries, watching the films, especially since there was jumping through era.
So many eras. I'm like stressed out thinking about.
I know, like I don't know how to keep it separate.
Doing one alone would be stressful. And then you're like
the fact that you had to do Victorian,
because you even have like small glimpses. Yeah, well, and like on the carriage, like you have like brief or like Cleopatra, like you have such tiny moments or Agnes teaching that you still have to, you know, build a whole. It's not only like the big eras, but the little ones too. You have to still build. It's so stressful. There was a question there somewhere at the beginning.
Yeah, but if there was an unexpected pull that made you think like, oh, this was so cool. This has to be on the board. This has to be featured somehow.
I don't know really. I mean, I guess with the more sort of period stuff, the 1600s and the 1800s, we kind of like, you know, you keep within the period, and then you kind of work with your color palette, so that sort of defines. And it's in some ways it's a little bit more straightforward, but I think with the 80s, was much more, you know, to play with.
And a lot of documentation.
There was much more changes, and there's a much bigger story arc for all of the characters, really.
Right.
You get Alice when she's, Agnes, Alice also, when she, you know, first arrives in New York, and we gave her a very sort of English Lady Di look. Which
that's a really good point. We referred to her wig, you know, with the makeup as the Lady Di wig, and we sort of defined it by the wigs, really. And then when she's more adapted to New York, then she kind of goes into her sort of Madonna phase, which was
of course,
you know, it's a little bit like she's got the perm, and it's you know, a lot of jewelry, and just sort of a bit like, you know, a bit more. She's kind of found herself, but it's also when she's sort of the most lost as well, in a way, and that's sort of when she starts therapy, and you know, and kind of feels like she's turning her life around when she meets George, and you know, decides to get married, not really knowing he's it's a bit like, you know, it's sort of like she's kind of finding herself, rediscovering herself all the time. So we wanted to sort of show that transition in her story arc, and also with George. I mean, his story arc as well was kind of brilliant, because in the 18th century he was obviously a very rich, powerful man, and then you see him as like this hobo.
In the arc is interesting.
It's just following her around
Right.
with the little dog, you know, and
Yeah.
and it's really sweet. And we kind of kept his color palette as well, like the sort of,
okay.
because he's got a bullish character.
Mhm.
We sort of put him in browns and earthy tones in the 18th century, and then carried forward to his 80s stuff. And you know, when he was looking quite kind of feral, you know, in his brown jacket, and then when he's sort of a bit more cleaned up and he's presentable, and he starts going to therapy with Alice and meets her, and he's got his nice new haircut, and you know, but he's still in the brown jacket and
So refined,
slightly mustardy kind of top, which is the same as his 18th century kind of mustardy gold kind of coppery waistcoats and things. So we kept
the cool tones
a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think with Agnes, she had the most kind of changes, but we still kept sort of some echoes of her costume from the 18th century. So she's wearing some of the jewelry from then, some of the earrings,
I didn't even notice that.
heart-shaped kind of brooch, because she gives it to Alex in the 18th century, and then he had it later in his dressing room in the 80s when she goes and sees him backstage. So there's a lot of those little kind of Easter eggs. But yeah, and also we had both Meg and Agnes in sort of a bit of tartan, which was like a throwback to the 1600s in Scotland. So there was a lot of these little things that we kind of tied together, which is sort of subtle, but it was like really fun to do.
Wow. I mean, you're in attention to detail. I mean, just seeing you light up, it's just really impeccable to see. And it made me realize, like, how are you approach this project? It seems like you're obviously so passionate about it. It turned out great. Like,
how did you and
how did you and Alice meet up and figure out this is my idea, this is what I'm actually looking to do? How did you find out about it?
And you can talk, you know, like projects from before, like, you know, what's
like how are you usually approached for a project?
I first met Alice. I designed a film with her called Adult Life Skills, which came out in 2015, and so like loved working with her, and I was a huge fan of her work, as is everybody. So it was kind of like when I got the call, I was like, oh my god, absolutely! And I read the script, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing.
What a fun project.
And I immediately reread it, and I don't think I've ever done that with a script.
Oh, you're like, I can't put it down. I have to start working now.
Oh my god, this is like, you know, because it's so much. It's like so sort of like, it's like this crazy ride, isn't it, through the ages? And it was just so funny and so brilliant, and I was like, you know, absolutely hooked. So we kind of got together and sort of, you know, kind of planned out the sort of the color palettes and the sort of what we, you know, references we wanted to pull from. And there was a lot of it was funny because Alice had like this huge Pinterest board.
Oh wow.
And before I'd seen that, when I was still sort of like pitching for the job, I made this mood board which was like about 150 pages long.
Wow.
God.
That's not even a mood board. That is a lookbook.
Yeah, like this point. Book, I'll buy it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a coffee table book.
Yeah, a coffee table book.
But it was kind of lovely because there was a lot of when I finally saw Alice's sort of Pinterest board, there was so many of the same images on there.
Oh, wow.
Cool that we, you know, kind of on the same page.
Yeah.
So that was like a really good kind of starting point. But it's sort of you know, we had these ideas of like sticking to a palette for Agnes of like pink and blue, and she had this great idea of it being her costume being almost like a mood ring, where like when she's feeling sad she'd be in blue, and then maybe when she's having her more romantic scenes with Alex she'd be in sort of like a pink. And then so we ended up doing that with the first time we see her in the 18th century, she's in that amazing blue dress, and then it sort of really shows her kind of status in the world. You know, she looks very affluent but still sad, you know. And then there was this sort of motif of the blue flowers, which is sort of all the way through, and particularly apparent in the, you know, in the wedding scene in the 80s. You know, we've got all the blue flowers, and then George is in the blue suit.
Yeah, very 80s.
Oh. But things like that, like now that you know, you can go back and rewatch and looking out for those color palettes and looking out for those the design Easter eggs, like what you were saying. That's incredible. But maybe we could talk about just like your origin story into costume design. Maybe what was the first project that you worked on, that the first time that you were kind of handed the reins and kind of had the creative freedom to do what you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, I think my first job as a costume designer, I was still in college, and I did a short film with Howard Marks, who you might know as the guy. There was a film made about him, Mr. Nice. He was like this international kind of like, you know, weed sort of. Yeah, there was that brilliant film made about him with Reese Van starring, and so that was my first costume job. I made like a hemp suit for him for this short film.
Wow.
And it was so lovely. He was such a lovely guy, and so sweet. And I was like, yeah, this is great. I've made the right life choice here.
Yeah, you're like, I'm actually very happy in this.
Yeah,
this combines all my loves.
Great. There are, you know, if it went bad right away, then you'd be like, ooh, you know, there wasn't.
Yeah,
not fun. It wasn't hitting.
But that was the thing. I carried on doing short films while I was at college, and I think by the time I'd actually graduated, I'd probably designed about 12 films.
Oh wow.
Short films.
right. Yeah.
And then
feature.
A month after leaving, I did a full feature, which was just sort of came about through some random connections in the kind of fashion industry, because I did a lot of interning in fashion as well to learn about pattern cutting and get better at that contemporary thing. It's like learning a lot of the period sort of cutting at college, but then, you know, I was like, right, I want to learn about contemporary fashion as well, so I went and did that, and so that's how that came along. And then I think I just sort of kept at it really, and loved assisting people because you learn so much more, you know. It's amazing. And I just kind of loved just getting stuck in really.
So you were kind of cutting your teeth on like a movie set essentially. So what's the transition from your short films and working on that to the great, you know, in a Hulu series, a TV set? How did that process kind of happen?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I'd sort of always used to assist designers, and then I'd go off and design my kind of smaller projects, you know, when I was sort of starting out, and then I've just kind of, you know, carried on designing. But yeah, the great that came about because I was sort of friends with Sharon Long, the designer, who and we used to share a studio at one point.
Oh, wow.
So and that was like this amazing thing that, you know, they managed to keep working through COVID, and they had a really fantastic setup where they had like everybody was sort of in a bubble, so they had the same background, and they were like this, you know, big sort of gang, and they were all like really, you know, really good mates. It was really lovely.
That's really cool.
So I kind of just jumped in to help out with some of those crowd fittings, because it was sort of like, you know, obviously a lot of episodes, a lot of jumping back and forth, and you know, so it was really nice to just sort of be involved in that. Such an amazing show.
Well, and
like a period piece.
But and so many people. I mean, even in like Timestalker too, like you kind of have your main cast crew, but you have to dress the background actors too, and everybody has to make it feel universal.
Because that's the thing. I think with background, people kind of go, oh, you know, it's not so. But actually, they're kind of
it does. Yeah,
they're kind of selling it for you as well, just in the same way as the production designers. They're sort of like every single element on that screen is selling
matters
to be authentic, and you know, and so it is kind of like it's definitely something that needs just as much attention in a way, you know. As the main cast.
Are you kind of building up your own collection house with any of these things? Are you to keep?
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of got a bit of a kind of costume archive. I've got a studio sort of full of
That's so cool.
costume stock. And I guess it's one of those things. I sort of started collecting vintage when I was in my teens. I think sort of being a teenager in the 90s, I just found like, I was always sort of looking for stuff from the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And like,
I bet you struck gold.
Dresses.
Yeah. That must have been, those thrift stores, those charity shops must have been incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And I was always like finding these like wild psychedelic pattern things and like, cutting them into like kind of little dresses to go clubbing in or whatever. And
love.
Yeah,
that was
new inspo.
That was my kind of introduction, I guess, to sewing. And yeah, so I sort of started building up the archive, and then the more I worked, the more I was sort of accumulating costume stock, and it's a really good way of actually just sort of being a bit more resourceful.
Yeah.
It really helps with your budget because sometimes on something, I often sort of do fairly modest budget films in a way, because sometimes the writing is so much more interesting at that budget level, and so it's really, really handy for that. But also it's this thing of like, the clothes feel more authentic when they've actually sort of had a little bit of a life.
Yeah, when it's been lived in by that time.
When everything's bought new,
it
just doesn't feel that authentic. And actually sometimes it's, it just sort of creates a little bit more realism, if you like. Yeah, so I've just been hoarding ever since, really.
That's the dream. I love that. Do you feel like you like the lessons your career and your designing fashions, do you feel like it's influencing your own like personal fashion? Like are you obsessed
like on set, like as a designer?
Yeah. Like how you waking up in the morning, like what am I gonna do you treat yourself, are you really informed in fashion in your own kind of design?
Do you know what? I probably don't think about what I wear as much as others.
You're like, I'm busy getting you guys.
Yeah, this is my job, so I separate personal versus professional.
Yeah,
it's a common theme, I think, with designers as well, where we're so busy wearing everything that's going on camera, and then you just turn up for work in your North Face and whatever, and it's
true, that black puffer, and then that's it. Yeah,
absolutely. And the one thing, like, I mean, I kind of always wear black. I just always do, always have. And it's kind of funny, like I rarely put black on camera. So it's like a total opposite of my world and the world I'm creating for other
like people. You said, don't be me. We can't do what I'm doing. You can't blend it with me.
Yeah.
Well, when do you feel, when you're building a costume, especially for, those background characters where subtle is everything kind of in the details, because you never know if they're going to be passing. How do you feel and how do you approach a costume and know, okay, this is done. I can move on. You don't need another accessory.
It's just a vibe.
I mean, it depends.
It's a feeling.
Yeah, a feeling.
It's kind of almost like a dial.
Yeah.
You're like
how much do I invest in you?
You have to stand back and go, is that too much?
Right. Yeah.
And
something like Timestalker, it's like the campier, I feel like the better. Like really going all the way.
Everything was turned up to 11 on that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it was, that was the lovely thing about it, because we were sort of echoing all those eras, and then all the 18th century, it's so flamboyant and insane, it's like so over the top.
Yeah.
And the 80s also is just really crazy when you actually look at it, and you're like, and it's got all those frills and the sort of the pomp of it all.
Yeah, no, truly, it's like the ridiculousness. It's a selling point.
Yeah.
It's not avant-garde, it's just normal for them. What a time. That's crazy.
So it felt like there was never too much,
Yeah, for sure. So when you were speaking about costume houses, I was like, wait, say more, because I'm so intrigued with the idea of sourcing. Like, I love, obviously, when a film comes out and then they we could talk, interview with costume director, just talks about sourcing. Okay, how? Like, are you on the real? Are you on, what are the sites that you kind of like go to, or like the costume houses, what do they usually entail? What do they usually have in? And, where's that community like? If I'm interested in having this, is there a reservation process? So all these people kind of working together.
So you kind of go, and they're usually sort of like, like a big warehouse, and they'll have everything sort of sectioned out into different areas. So you just kind of go and sort of pull out things that you like the look of, that sort of work with your palette, that work for the character, that maybe is within the size range. And I think, it's always that thing of like, you can kind of take a chance on something if you can alter it a little bit, and very often, so if you really fall in love with a piece and it doesn't quite fit, all the costume houses will, they have like amazing people, on site who can sort of do all those alterations for you, because the majority have like a workroom anyway, so you can sort of adapt things, and they will sort of help you get there to find that sort of perfect thing. And
that's so nice.
And they're so accommodating and amazing. I mean, we sort of worked with Angels and Cosprop, who are like, two incredible costume houses here, and it was just sort of it's a lovely process. I always sort of love that first day of kind of pulling things, because it's like it's like, sort of going through an Aladdin's cave, you're just like, pressure.
Like you're just kind of taking everything and being like, well, what will stick?
It would be so hard to focus in, I feel like.
I know, that's what I was thinking too.
I'd be like, I want to see this. It
would be so hard to kind of figure out, like, I love this, but it's not for this project by any means, but I love it, I need to use it somehow.
I mean, that's the thing. I kind of like, you're really sort of, I always really kind of focus on like, all right, what do we need? You go in with like
tunnel
an
vision
absolute list of, like breakdown of every single item that you need. I always love this sort of inspiration that comes from that sort of first day in a costume house. Because it is like, oh, what about this? What about this? You just sort of like,
it's exciting.
Things, and then you can kind of play dress up later and like sort of put it all together with the accessories, and then it sort of comes to life a bit. But it's always a real thrill that first day, I think.
Throwing everything at the wall. Well, were there any like costumes or like, ideas that just didn't make the cutting room floor?
That did make the cutting room floor.
That did make the cutting room floor.
They
did in fact see it. They did make the cut.
I guess, like, I think with most of the characters we kind of stuck to the plan. I would say, like, probably with Alex's stage costume, we went through the evolution of ideas with that. Because
that's what's fun about the 80s too, though, is there's so many different aesthetics. Like, I feel like with Meg, like, she's really like this revolutionary, like, lesbian feminist a little bit. Like, you can still tell the differences, where I don't think you have that as much in the individualism's a lot more presence in there. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like the Rockstar, you could have went 8 million different ways. You could have went like a David Bowie look.
Well, that was the thing. I think with Meg, we kind of knew that we were going to start out with her more in her, when we see her and Agnes together at the beginning, and they're in their Lady Di phase, they're still very English in there.
You're doing it
like, oh, spot the English girls in New York. And then
we're like, we're still in our Lady Di phase, actually. So
me.
But we kind of knew then that Meg would sort of have this more sort of feminist leaning later on, and so we were looking at like kind of references like Patti Smith and like, and a little bit sort of Debbie Harry as well, like a little bit kind of, she just sort of becomes more powerful.
Definitely.
And then I think as well with Agnes, we'd sort of plotted out that sort of that kind of story arc with her from the, you know, English lady. I looked at it more sort of like, you know, becoming a bit more New York cool and just sort of integrating a little bit more, you know, as she becomes sort of a little bit more unhinged in a way, you know.
Yeah, like seeing her take a new era.
And it was funny as well with Alex, like his sort of story arc, because at the beginning we see a lot of the sort of artwork for his album covers and stuff like that, and all the posters that are on the wall, and it's a very sort of like adamant look. There was a very, like, you know, obvious reference with that because it tied into that sort of highwayman look from sort of earlier on in the 18th century. But then it's sort of like when we start to see him later on, he's kind of not at the height of his fame anymore, and there's sort of like this decline that we see. So when we were talking about his stage costume, which is we see him in this big red cape, but I mean, first of all, we were talking about because his name is Alex Phoenix, we were talking about having like a phoenix-like costume,
rise from the ashes,
like these wings, and like,
very like
and then
fun.
Alice was like, oh, maybe we could make it like almost have like an Egyptian theme, so maybe like the Egyptian god Horus, the winged god, you know. And it sort of, it went through a real evolution, and then eventually, and we were looking at things like, you know, Bowie and his Ziggy Stardust era, and like, you know, this more sort of glam rock look and all these kind of things. And then eventually we sort of Alice got this reference from like Japanese theatre of this like enormous red cape that kind of fills the stage, you know. So we sort of went for that, had this cape made, and then sort of went with like a
oh my gosh, you had it made,
a red tail suit, because the sort of red's tied into his red suit in the ball, where he's got like the bird mark and all.
We need to rewatch now that we see these Easter eggs, like this invisible string that's going through, like, oh my gosh, your mind.
But it's kind of funny with his stage costume, like, you know, it's sort of like when you see it, it's kind of like, you know, his star is in decline a little bit, so you can see these guys at the back of, like, that are just sort of swishing his cape. They kind of didn't have enough money for the wing.
Oh my gosh,
it's sort of like, it's kind of like a little in joke. And then by the time we see him in that final scene with Agnes, and he's just sort of like you know, drunk and disheveled on you know, on the stage, and he's wearing this white shirt, and that's actually his shirt from the Victorian era costume. And like, you know, and so Alice appears in her white wedding dress, so that's like a lovely kind of moment of unity before it, you know, all disappears. But yeah, I think there's just sort of there was a lot of ideas that sort of circulated before we sort of landed on the right thing. You know?
Well, and like I mean, there's like the record you can buy, like the time value may not like the Timestalker score, and in it it's like has photos of like Alex like in his like costumes, like it's very like 80s like album, like it's very in character, which is like cool. And then you have like the magazine stuff too, so there's even like outfits that you're doing and costumes you're doing to just like build the world,
just for promo, just for the
like,
world,
like that stuff, which is really cool and very fun.
And actually, I think some of those costumes that we used, you know, that are on the album cover that you can buy now, you know, those were sort of my favorite costumes for him in a way, because when we actually meet him, he's a bit of a has-been in a way, you know? So it's like those were the ones where he was, you know, at the height of his fame. We had a lot of fun doing those shoots.
It's such a fun concept. I love when especially films just like go there, and you can have like it's like a freedom too. It's a collaboration.
Well, what was your, I know you just mentioned that this was some of your favorites, but what was your personal favorite look in the movie?
Oh God, that's a really hard one.
So many.
I don't know, actually.
I know so many.
I kind of loved the 18th century ball was like great fun for everybody. and also the wedding was like kind of like the 80s wedding was kind of like the equivalent of that, where you had all the same characters.
That's a really good point.
We got to do some really fun costumes, you know. For Scipio had like an 18th century cravat that he was wearing with this loud 80s shirt, and like, they still sort of went a bit flamboyant. But yeah, I don't know, I loved the 1940s cabaret costumes as well. Cleopatra and Nick's knife throwing costume, where we have this sort of like Arabian kind of inspired sort of waistcoat and a frilly shirt, and it was just like he looked so adorable in it. It was just like really, really good fun to design that.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
Well, would you ever, I mean, just I feel like the costumes that you've been, you know, responsible for, they've been so intricate and they've been so memorable, and it's like I want a photo of them forever. I'm thinking of the scenes. Would you ever think of creating one of those, you know, like a book or something?
Yeah, you need to do
behind the scenes. Yeah,
you need to do that.
You need to do this.
We will get in touch with somebody.
Like, let's find a publishing house for you, because I feel like you've built such worlds that are so. I would love to see like your notes and like next to the
we're just like
photos.
The perfect audience for that stuff.
I know, we're eating this up, but I just feel like you've built such great worlds and you're still going. Like I can't wait to see what's next, but just know that there's an audience for your eventual costume lookbook.
Oh no, that would be great. I mean, I can send you that 150-page mood board.
Oh my gosh, yeah. We will sign that NDA. It won't leak it. I promise.
Sign an NDA.
But see that alongside the finished costumes, and
it would be really cool.
That influence was still in there, and we kind of stuck to the plan in some places, you know, and it's sort of really
cool.
For a film like Timestalker too, like it is, you know, like I'm not as familiar with like the UK film industry, obviously, but like
we're apologies.
Sorry, but I wish. But like I know Alice said it took like 22 days to shoot. Like it feels like a very small film, a very independent film. And then like for like when I'm watching it, if you don't have like, I think the costumes is such an important part for building that world. Like if you don't have this look to it, it falls apart because
it falls flat. Yeah,
I feel like. So that's what's really like the amount of time and dedication that you two, I think, put into it and designing it like is felt across the screen. I think it's so like when I reviewed it, that was like the biggest thing that stood out to me. And then I also was like I was like, am I the stalker? And like I got social about it a little bit. But
wait, is this film about us?
It's about me. But yeah, it's really, you can really feel it. I feel like that's and in a way, like it feels almost like a student film in a sense, where it's like these people coming together to make a project, like that you guys are all working together and reusing the pieces. Like there's so much love behind it in a way that feels like you don't always feel that when you're watching a movie. So it's very lovely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to
a real passion project for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and it was kind of a, you know, it was minimal. We had sort of minimal background as well, and so again we had that, like, you know, there was all that familiarity. You know, we wanted sort of continuity throughout the ages, and so it just meant that we could, you know, because it was sort of quite scaled back, we could kind of shoot to that short time frame.
Is there, you know, like a dream project idea, a dream director that you would love to work with? What's a space that you would love? Do you think about going into like the theater for costume design?
Let's manifest it.
Yeah.
I mean, not so much. I used to do a bit of theatre when I just sort of first left college, but I haven't really done that for years. I knew I always wanted to be working in film. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I kind of like, it's funny because I kind of decided I wanted to do a period comedy, and then Timestalker came.
You did. Yeah, like, exactly. So
the manifestation worked out. Like
here.
Yeah. That's always sort of like a dream job, because I love doing comedies, because Well, one, everyone brings so much fun to it, but also there's so much about the comedy that's like a visual cue. So there's you know, you can do really interesting costumes. So I always really enjoy that, because you can kind of go really far with it. You know, it can be kind of like crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a lot of fun to do. But I also love horror, like really love horror. So like
yes.
70s folk horror would be like a dream.
Oh,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You said something 70s folk horror. Oh my god, that's incredible.
I mean, like the Wicker Man is like one of my favorite films ever, you know, and things like that. And I love a lot of the sort of 70s horrors. And Don't Look Now, you know, it was kind of like the golden age of horror, and for me anyway. So I do love that, and you know, sort of more kind of supernatural things. But yeah, also love comedy, also love doing dramas, you know, that are really sort of visceral, kind of you know, the ones that you leave the cinema and you're like, oh, I just might need to drink now.
Yeah, like I feel heavy.
Like really, you know, that you just get so drawn into it. It's like a really emotional experience. I love those as well, because I think, you know, it's really important to make films that make you feel something, you know, and I love being a part of that. And I love working with directors who've, you know, written the piece themselves, because they're so invested in it, they're so passionate, they know the world intricately. So you know, it's amazing to work with them and then to sort of interpret that vision. So yeah, those are the things. It's just like, I mean, I guess regardless of the genre, it's always finding a script that really like makes your heart sing. And it's
the writer-director combo.
Yeah, it's so special when you read something like that, and you're like, oh my god,
you can feel it.
What's in it? When you were talking about the drama that makes you feel something, was there one that came to the front of your mind that you left the cinema and you felt this way? That you're like, okay, the costumes were there, the acting was there. Like, what a great project.
I mean, oh my god, so many. But I think out of films that I've designed, Shell, which is a film I did back in 2012 with a Scottish director, Scott Graham, and Kate Dickey's in it as well. So
great.
I've worked with Kate 3 times now, so that's lovely. But Shell is one of those films that that people often tell me that like it really affected them, and they kind of thought about it for a long time afterwards, and that sort of thing. And I mean that was sort of nominated for a BAFTA, so it was, you know, one of those really special ones, I think. Absolutely. But yeah,
wow, that's incredible though. Yeah, like what Cam said in the beginning of like, oh, it's BAFTA nominated. Let me guess.
I was like, let me pull these, and it was just everything you had.
BAFTA.
We get it, girl. I love it. Okay, so now I'm gonna ask the question: have you seen Jackie 2016, directed by Pablo?
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful costumes in that.
Beautiful gowns.
Gowns, beautiful gowns.
I know. Yeah, amazing. I mean, I remember sort of reading about it at the time, and that you know, Chanel were on board with recreating all of those incredible looks, and especially that pink suit, which, oh my god, I mean, that I think that was a really, you know, important moment in the power of costume, you know, seeing that suit with the blood stains on it. It's just so like powerful.
And the pillbox hat, like, oh my gosh.
I mean, Jackie, I love, like, the real Jackie, beautiful, like, knew how to dress.
Beautiful gowns,
Very fun. When we asked that, I didn't even think that like you're British, so I feel like me and Val have a little bit more of a connection.
Like, wait,
that's our family, and they took them out, but
it came for us. No, we always ask everyone that question because it's such a litmus test for us. And, like, have you seen this? It just says so much, I think, about a person. Have you seen Jackie?
It's funny. That's one of those films that we left the theater and we were like, oh god.
Well, I'm gonna be thinking about that accent.
I'm gonna be thinking about it been what, 10 years now?
The transatlantic accent of it all.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Becky. I feel like there's like 8 million other things I would love
I know we could just like
but
ask you so many questions. Well, before we let you go, so where do you have any future projects coming up that you can maybe give us a sneak peek on?
What are you looking forward to in the future? You can also say
exactly. You're looking forward to
line and it's a funny thing when you make films, because it's sort of like you kind of can't talk about it for a
long time.
We'll be refreshing our IMDb. We'll be looking.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be tracking.
I have the IMDb Pro, so we'll be seeing the development.
But that's exciting, though.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, that's good. I'm happy you can't tell me. It's always a good thing when you can't share the news. Yeah, like okay, that means like no news is good news.
It's a lovely thing when you do actually then get to kind of,
and it becomes everybody's
project with the world when it finally comes out, because it's obviously it's like, usually a year or more, till
right
and gets released, and then it's like, well, hey, this thing,
it's like here's a trailer. I did this.
It's always weird when I think about how many movies and Val, like even like stuff that people are working on now, and we have no idea.
I know, like there's a movie being made right now that's 2026 me. Yeah, 2026 and 2027.
No idea it exists yet.
I'm so happy for that girl. Like I know in like a year or two she's gonna be obsessed with that. So I can't wait to see her tweets. Like she's gonna be loving. Well, Becky, thank you so much. Couldn't be more happy to speak with you and to hear all about your nuggets of joy and wisdom and all of that. So excited for these future projects that we do not know about, but I know they're gonna be great, and I can't wait to be obsessed with them. And to have follow-up questions.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for getting in touch. It's been really lovely to talk about the crazy whirlwind adventure that was Timestalker. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
See you next week.